Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today to this our series of masterminds on different subjects. And today I have the great pleasure of actually having on this special occasion Scott, Stuart, and Anton de Leeuw, two terrific individuals who are well respected in the industry. So I can't wait till we get into the mastermind. But I'm just gonna run some through quick housekeeping. So the actual event is being recorded. We're going to actually show this recording later on, and it's going to be posted in YouTube. If any of the attendees are not happy about the event being recorded, or they don't want to appear in the recording, please do let us know. Drop us a line, and then we'll do the necessary amendments. Please keep your questions to the Q&A box whilst the session is going, and then we're going to have at the end of the presentation a peer consulting session where participants can actually share issues that they have at work, and they can actually get some sort of feedback from the group and have group discussion after the mastermind. For those who don't know about turnaround, the EACTP, oh, sorry, Helen, the disclaimer, I forgot to mention the disclaimer. If we can go on to the EACTP, yes. For those who don't know about the EACTP, we are a growing or self-regulated professional body who give a standard through accreditation to people, professionals that are actually practicing the discipline of turnaround in the UK, Europe, and internationally. Our focus is in education. We have an educational program called the Certified Turnaround Analyst program, which is an online course, and it takes about 2 years to complete. And then we have the programs for those professionals who have been practicing the discipline for more than 12 years, which is the Certified Turnaround Professional accreditation. And we also have the corporate membership, which is giving accreditation to those employers who invest in their talent for their talent development on the turnaround discipline. And of course, we follow on the educational program and development of professionals by collaboration, as well as having these masterminds and other events. We also work in partnership with Turnaround Management Association, and we have a few events. Helen, can you put the, these are the kind of masterminds that we have in the schedule. And for the rest of the year, more days are going to be released as we actually progress through the calendar. And the events for TMA, we're ready. Then we have the for Turkey, the Turkey conference on the 27th of July. Sorry, November. And well, without further ado, I'll hand over the floor to Anton and Scott. Thank you, gentlemen. All yours.
Thank you, Maria, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anton, and not Scott, which is helpful to know. And I'm genuinely privileged today to be joined by someone I can call a friend, a colleague, and most recently, Scott Stewart's been appointed as the Global CEO to INSOL. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks, Anton. Pleasure to be here with all of my friends and colleagues.
So Scott, when we scoped this out back in Bergamo, Italy, we were face-to-face, a lot easier to do this rather than online and create chemistry. And we had this great idea that we were going to replicate a conversation around leadership and the soft skills of leadership. And to speak to your point, then you were the TMA Global CEO, and you are now moved into your role as the CEO of INSOL International. I'd like to begin, if that's okay, with sharing your quote that you had in Italy. Oh, you spoke about in Italy, and if, for the sake of the audience, I might read that out, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
And I'd like to discuss that with you. So you wrote, in Italy, you said, the art of leadership involves vision, passion, and raw fearlessness. It is ego and humility wrapped in one. understanding that failure is not an end but a lesson. Yet the true power of a leader lies in not being heard, but in the courage to listen, truly listen, because only then we can ignite change. Scott, when you look back in your career, is there a defining moment that you could share with the audience which speaks to your leadership journey that's crystallized Scott Stuart today?
There are several, but the one that I'll point to, Anton, and thank you for putting that quote front and center, because I think that quote really embodies the essence of leadership on so many levels. But I think the defining moment is really an accumulation of moments that led to the understanding that we're at this very rare inflection point in the world, in society, in the workplace, of multi-generationalism. And the multi-generationalism that spans 4 generations from baby boomers to Gen Zers is really the crystallized moment of understanding that these pieces all are at interplay. Without the appreciation of the multi-generationalism in the workplace, you can't be an effective leader. And while it's a rare moment that we have 4 generations of people in the workplace, it's also probably very close to the end of this very rare moment that creates both opportunity and tension. So for me, it's about embracing the multi-generationalism and taking the pieces from each of the generations, diaspora of what that means, and bringing it into a holistic environment of understanding that we can all learn from, extract from, and move into the next generation of what leadership is going to look like. And we're already starting to see that. And not in direct answer to this question, but you see around the world how the Gen Zers are now becoming that next generation, and they're forcing leadership into a new place. And the baby boomers are starting to time out more and more and more. But it's the multi-generationalism, the tensions, the beauty, the learnings, and the of what that all means that's really crystallized my thought.
Thank you, Scott. And so, and to your point, what's that moment in your career where perhaps you could share with us, you might have thought differently before, and then now that's crystallized the view that you currently have? Was that a moment, or was that an evolution?
It was an evolution. It's not, there are many moments that define how a leader acts, but leadership is evolutionary. It's not static, and it's never stagnant. And so it was an evolution over the course of time as I began to interact with different people and different modes of thought. Example, when I began my last role, there was a big focus on regional practice. And the world has become more international, and the geopolitical landscape has pushed us into thinking in a more global way, but that wasn't always the thought. So as the evolution of that became a reality, so in the thinking of how to lead an organization started to change the way I thought. But it also created tensions as there were people of different schools of thought who were interfacing, some bucking against the trend of where society was going, and some embracing the opportunity for change. Change is hard. And if you're not willing to evolve and push through what makes you comfortable to get uncomfortable, you can't be an effective leader.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to speaking about the cross-border leadership, because we've got some good research around that. I just want to pick up on one thing that more than one person spoke about in Italy, and we spoke about. You used the phrase raw fearlessness. And we spoke about the reality of our experiences, and we might have people in the room that disagree, that leaders often feel fear. And for you, in your experience, is fearlessness an absence of fear, or is it something different for you?
That is a great question. Fearlessness, let me start with fear. Fear is a natural state of humanity, and it's easy to become afraid. But when you become afraid, you can also get stuck. Fearlessness has to be balanced against recklessness. So you can't be fearless without being concerned that you're being perceived as reckless. So when I say fearlessness, I mean push through your fear. Be able to be uncomfortable. Know that you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. But if you stay true to your value system, your beliefs, and you start to get buy-in as to your leadership style, then you can move past fear. And fear is often a manifestation of the fear of others imposed on you more than it is fear for yourself. But you have to be unafraid to stand your ground, but also not be perceived as reckless. Like everything else in life, it's about balance. Yeah. So I could be fearless in the way I present myself as a leader, although I may have many fears or concerns along the way. I don't have to put those out there front and center, but I have to personally manage them. And then as a leader, be able to stand up and be able to explain how I'm trying to position myself as a leader, being empathetic to the fears that are being imposed on me, which largely may be the fears of others, and sometimes they may be partially the fears of mine, and to be able to push through those gently and in balance without seeming reckless and headstrong in the way that I lead. So it really comes back to fear is an element that creates a balance point in the whole scheme of what leadership is about.
And I want to talk about a bit of balance now, because this entire sort of talk was centered around leading across boundaries. And to our point, it's now a strategic asset. Well, maybe that's a statement. We shared some research together, Heidrich and Struggles, and there's others out there, recently did this incredible survey where they managed to get 500 CEOs to answer a questionnaire. And it was overwhelming in the response rate that 2/3 see leading across boundaries or borders is no longer something that is an option. It's foundational to any organization to achieve strategic goals. So when you heard that and we spoke about it, we haven't, well, when you heard that and we haven't spoken since, leading across boundaries is now being treated as a hard performance driver. You were TMA CEO, you're now INSOL International. Does that resonate with your experience? Does that resonate with your pressures and demands now?
Absolutely. And when I looked at this question in preparation for today's discussion, I thought, could I come up with one line which would encapsulate an answer, which we can go into more in detail? And the line I came up with, it speaks to the ability to connect desperate perspectives, bridge silos, and mobilize talent wherever it sits. And let's just let that sit for a minute. Connect disparate perspectives, bridge silos, and mobilize talent wherever it sits. So what it's saying is clearly in the current role I have, I'm managing all of that because I'm dealing with people, cultures, different talents, different styles of leaderships, different understanding of what diversity means, disparate perspectives from all over the world. It's easy to fall into silos of what works for you and what works for a piece of the whole. But it's mobilizing the whole of those desperate pieces. It's breaking down the silos, and then it's mobilizing the talent, both to learn from each other, to understand how to be existent in a cooperative environment, and then to take that and mix it all up and come out with a better result than the result of the pieces. It's the pieces that make the whole, but bringing the pieces together means breaking down the barriers of all that exists in the many pieces, and particularly in my role in INSOL International, where I'm dealing with people and cultures and emerging economies and a geopolitical landscape and a polarized political environment. You are dealing with the biggest era of disparate perspectives that I think we have ever seen. So managing all these pieces and putting them into the right place to get the best result for an organization, for a private company, for a not-for-profit, whatever it is, it takes a lot of effort, but it also takes a lot of understanding and a lot of patience. And some of it is going to happen organically, but a lot of it is going to happen by managing the pieces and extracting the best of those pieces in a way that it can all come together in a way where you can inch forward.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, and you're allowed to say, no, I'm not going to answer the question. You're fresh in the role. If we make this sort of a concrete fact that we cross-border sort of leadership is a mandatory sort of requirement, where you've mentioned a lot of factors there, where do you feel the hardest boundary actually sits? You've mentioned generations, and I'm not priming you here, but you've mentioned generational expectations, professions around the table. You've mentioned geography, you mentioned culture. What's your experience you would share with anyone in this room right now? And when I say hardest, you can define that how you like.
Let me use the example of the pandemic as the best example. Somebody had said to me during the pandemic, we didn't realize what we could achieve during the pandemic when we had to adapt to an environment that was thrust on us. And we had the technology that we didn't think was going to be available to us until 2030 that we were using in 2020. People are not quick to change is the message in that. But when you give them the tools to change and give them an understanding that change can be healthy and change can be good, and then you test out the pieces of that change, you can actually become very effective in it, as opposed to getting stuck where you are and not necessarily being slow to change, because being slow to change is absolutely okay. But as you can see from the example of the pandemic, when we were thrust into the necessity of change, we adapted. Now, let me juxtaposition that against AI. AI is causing terrible fear that the world is going to be upset and people are going to be displaced, and that we're not going to be able to function. We're not going to be able to function in the same, and the disruption is not going to be able to be overcome. That's fear. That's not disruption that we can't manage. That's disruption that is just the next industrial revolution in time, and that we're already adapting to it and adopting because of it. So, in answer to your question, I think that normal human nature becomes the barrier to accepting what forward thinking is about. And the example of it being thrust on us and us embracing it out of necessity is a really beautiful example about how sometimes we're our own barrier to change. And when change is right in front of us and we're not ready to adopt it yet, we don't. But yet when we have to, and it's thrust on us and it picks up acceleration, we start to let loose, and then we slowly start to adapt to a changed environment.
Well, I like the fact that you mentioned human behavior. So I'm going to ask you something, how you're blending the personals. So in that same article we shared, the research talks about this philosophy of integrated leaders, people who take both their personal responsibility and the organizational, the enterprise's responsibilities, and sort of morph them into this sort of cross-border leadership. So it's a personal question to your human behavior. How are you finding balancing that in your new role?
It's an interesting question. And I think it's multifaceted. First of all, it's realizing that I come from one cultural and professional perspective. My last role afforded me the opportunity to learn more about other cultures and other business thinking and other restructuring schemes, for example. So for me, what I think I've learned the most over the years, and what I integrate now in a role that's even more elevated on the cross-border experience, is that to make myself uncomfortable and to put myself in places where I can learn from others things that are less familiar to me, pushes me out of my own comfort zone and allows me to digest and synthesize information and understandings that are not natural to necessarily who I am or the learnings that I've had along the way. And let me dissect that a little further. As we get older and more experienced in life, we do know more and we are wiser in certain respects. But as we do that, we also get more comfortable and sometimes overly confident in who we are and what we're able to achieve. And we forget that a critical element to that, at least from my perspective, is to always allow yourself to have a segment of discomfort in learnings that are less familiar to you, because as you build your own profile and foundation and strengths as a leader, if you lose the perspective that there's always going to be a next generation of thought leadership right behind you, and you're unwilling to be open to what that means, you cannot continue to evolve as an effective leader, in my opinion. And I think the strength in my leadership is that I'm always focused on evolution. I am always willing to make myself a little to a lot uncomfortable. I am not impervious to the critiques of my style, and I'm always willing to morph, but I'm never willing to collapse my value system in terms of how I lead. And that is a lot. And if you just think about that, all that means is that I'm a creature of evolution and that I am constantly living and learning, not just with the tool chest and the arsenal of resources I have and the things that I've learned along the way, but the willingness to listen, learn, and be available for thought leadership that may be wholly contrary to the system that I have built over the course of time. And although that sounds very complex, I don't think it's complex at all. It just means you have to have a certain degree of open-mindedness as a percentage of the way you think as a leader.
And your values. So we're speaking about in an EACTP event. I've known you many years through TMA. You're now with INSOL. 3 words spring to mind. We spoke about member value, connection, and community. I refer to this as belonging, as you know. You've been very clear since the day I met you many years ago how passionate you are about member value and connections. Let's strip away slogans from any organization for a moment. What does member value actually mean to an organization like EACTP or other global organizations? What can we drill down to when we speak about value for us as members?
So let me I'll talk from the perspective of INSOL at the moment. INSOL, for example, is an ecosystem of many resources. So member value is about educating the members about the value of the resources, how they can avail themselves of those resources, and what those resources could mean to them professionally. Understanding member value is to then see how the members are interfacing with the resources that are available, whether through INSOL, TMA, EACTP, and whether or not the value proposition that's being imparted about how those resources are valuable to the member are being responded to. And if they're not being responded to, be unafraid to relook at those value proposition points, those resources, and either sunset those that are not working and are not producing the value for the member, or reprioritizing them in a way where the most value that's being garnered is being put front and center for an understanding of what the organization wants to put out there and is serving for, versus those that may have some value but need to be deprioritized because they appeal to a more nuanced group of the membership, which is okay. But you got to put front and center what works most for the organization and what speaks to the organization, and those that are availing themselves of what those value points or those resources for the organization mean. And then it's also ascertaining the feedback from how the members are responding to them, watching, learning, listening. From a leadership perspective, making sure you're interfacing with those members and you're talking to them and hearing them and being part of their experience, so that you too can then further reform the value points of what those resources mean.
And so I'd like to sort of expand on that slightly, because it's really curious that that same article we're referring to that spoke about professional arenas. You may contend it's just buzzwords to sell something, but the publication speaks to organizations' responsibilities to creating arenas, trusted spaces where differences can surface, can be worked through fairly, so that people sort of arrive at a member value. Do you see organizations like INSOL, EACTP, and others as having this unique role to create an arena? Is it something new, something old? Is it buzzy? How do you see the evolution of this? Because we sit with regulators, court practitioners, CTPs, lawyers. What's your views on professional arenas as a buzzy word?
So in an era where technology has taken on a lot more prominence, I think the concept of professional arenas is much more profound, impactful, and important than it was ever before. Where information used to transmit a lot more slowly, it was harder to get feedback and to create these arenas where you could take all the pieces of the puzzle and bring them into one space. With information traveling as fast as it does, I think more attention has to be paid to the different pieces that comprise of what you're referring to as the arena, and see how they're being responded to, generally, and where there are points of either success or points of concern. So yes, I don't think the arena concept is out of scope or just wordsmithing. I think it's a concept that if it didn't have relevance in a time before now, certainly does now, where you're getting feedback about what you're doing and how you're doing it at light speed, and largely because of technology and social media.
Okay. And so if I can, because I'm sort of looking at the time moving on, I've done my passion around belonging and membership. I'm not saying it isn't yours, but I'd like to move on to one of yours, which is DE&I, listening and sort of inclusive leadership. Forever since I've known you, you've been deeply cared about the subject matter. We've spoken many times how many organizations, rightly so, maybe even some sort of administrations, still treat this as a separate work stream. How do you think and feel about diversity in our profession? And I say our profession because it spans so many different professionals. And equally, if you could just reflect for us with your international lens and your cross-border lenses, beyond your own feelings as to some of your experiences.
For most people, this would be a difficult question. For me, this is a softball. For me,
maybe we should we open it to the audience?
We could. But for me personally, part of my value system, my leadership style, and everything that I very deeply believe into my core, diversity fuels everything. And it brings a diaspora of personage, thought leadership, cultural understandings, and a melting pot of ideas to the forefront. We are better as a society. We are better as an industry. We are better as a people when we bring diverse perspectives of all kinds together. Professionally, people-wise, religious-wise, political-wise. If you can't have discourse, dialogue, and you can't bring a diaspora of divergent thought into the experience, I think an organization becomes lesser. I think a leader can stall and become stagnant. And I think the best of who we are is because of the differences that comprise of the whole of what we are as a people and a society.
And so, Scott, as a leader, how do you do that? How do you take your new role, your old role? How do you do that? We're all interested to understand that, because I think many of us in this room understand you. For those that don't, really dumb it down for us. What does it look like as a cross-border CEO? Because it's not just one room you're dealing with here.
That's correct. I could be dealing with 100 countries, correct? Yeah. So that means I'm dealing with a diaspora of cultures. But what it also means is, as a leader, it's important for me to send the message, first and foremost, of my availability to hear the way people think, how they interact, how they see the world, and know that I'm available to hear that, which goes back to your very first question about listening. Listening is key. And so if you don't demonstrate yourself as a leader who's available and who's willing to listen and who's appreciative of the divergence of culture and thinking and thought and presentation and people and political discourse, etc., then you don't have the starting point to move the dial on diversity. I've been very fortunate in that, because of my availability as a person and as a leader who appreciates diversity as I do, that it's very much become organic in the cultures that I have built, less so than other cultures who contrive it or hit check marks to make sure that they're paying attention to it. And particularly now, where here in the United States, there's been a movement to quiet diversity to some degree, I continue to double down on its importance. And while I don't have to be combative in how I view it versus the views of others in the political landscape that we're in, I think I've set the stage that I get now the benefit of the organic payback of people understanding my appreciation for it and coming to me and my culture and the way that I work to build things as an environment they want to be in. And as a result of that, diversity then speaks for itself without me having to stand there and scream it from the rooftops. It becomes an obvious part of my cultural fabric and the way that I build and I show respect.
And Scott, we've got a cracking question, and I'm not sure if you've read it, so I'm going to read it out loud. It's come from Avik, I think, or Vic, if I pronounced that correctly. How much is the importance of appreciating cultural aspect and negotiation skill during cross-border turnaround strategy formations while you are in the charge of forming a new strategy where you are? That's a
I think, yeah,
thanks,
I think it's critical. I think it's critical. And I'll give you a great example. I'm a mediator, and I can tell you that years ago, I had a mediation between two absolutely divergent cultures. I had an Asian culture and a Middle East culture that were across the table, and there couldn't be two cultures that are more divergent in their presentation and how they approach each other. And as the mediator, not only did I need to instill confidence in an understanding of the cultures, both the cultures that were in front of me, but then I also had to show that I could adapt and be responsive to how those cultures interacted in a business environment, and then take that and in a very tight timed environment, get those two cultures to at least have a modicum of respect for each other to be able to find the best business solution. But it started with my teaching of an understanding of cultural respect for each. And when they saw that cultural respect for each, they began to have cultural respect to each other, even though they were very divergent in the way that they acted. So the answer to the question is, it is absolutely essential. And everything I have done has started with cultural respect. As a matter of fact, I tell the story all the time. When I was in my last role, the very first international trip I took, and I had asked a friend in Europe, well, how do I deal with this particular opportunity? And they said, when the door of the airplane closes, leave your American on the other side of the door and make sure that you are respectful to the culture that you are entering. And I took that to heart, so much so that the very first time I visited our German chapter as the first CEO of TMA to have ever done so, I made an attempt to at least do part of my speech in German. Why? Because I knew that it was important to them to see that I respected who they were and what they expected in their environment, in their home. I was a guest in their world. And that's just one example of many where I want to show that I'm available and that I am not perfect in the way they approach things, but I am respectful in the way that I try to put a lens on things.
That's interesting. So it just took me back to Bergamo. So let me finish my sentence before the first word shocks you. You've just given us a lovely story. So ego and humility, that's where I was going to with that. How do you balance confidence and humility now in your role to learn from others? And we had a really fascinating conversation, and you gave us some really good insights. So what can you bring back to our memory from that conversation in Italy?
Be unafraid to make mistakes. And, you said it again, it goes back to the original quote. Failure is an option, but failure is not a barrier. It's a moment of learning. And you can be kicked, and you can be put down in the moment. But if you look at the moment and dissect it for the reasons that it happened and what the quote failure represents, and you pick yourself back up and you say, okay, I can learn from this moment. It's a new environment. It's an unfamiliar set of people. It's a new culture. It's a new way of business thinking. And you take those learnings and you make the next opportunity a little bit better than the opportunity that may have been a weak or a failed moment. Then again, that's part of being a leader. I mean, no one is going to stand there and be perfect all the time. And when you're dealing with as I'm dealing with INSOL International across many countries and many cultures and many ways of thinking, I'm not going to make all the right decisions all the time, which is why listening and learning is going to be critical first. And then when I do make a decision or choose a path, if I get constructive to critical feedback on how that went, then it gives me the opportunity and actually the privilege to pause and think about it so that I'm being responsive in a thoughtful, kind, respectful, intellectual, and proper manner.
Thank you. Well, speaking of leading into the future, you've said your journey's been evolutionary. The audience has next generational leaders in us. The next 5 to 10 years, we probably generations have been saying this for years, is crucial. But we do live in really unprecedented times. What would you leave us today thinking would really distinguish those in the room that are leading today and looking to lead for the next 5 to 10 years? That's a nugget, an absolute nugget they can leave with, in your experience.
So first, I agree. The next 5 to 10 years are probably going to be some of the most defining in probably a century. We are at the zenith of a turn in leadership in the world. And we're going to see the new face of what that looks like. And what I would leave with is be introspective about who you are. Know that leadership is multifaceted and that there are leaders who lead others, but be unafraid to also lead yourself, and lead yourself through learning, through listening, through interacting. And not everybody is meant to be on the world stage of leadership, but leadership is a word that embraces more than leading others. It also is about leading yourself through knowledge, through observation, through participation, and sometimes for just being part of an experience. And so I think over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, where we're going to see this great turn in society, there's going to be a new emergence of leaders. And at the same time, there's going to be an opportunity for those who are moving into the workforce and are becoming the next generation of what this world is going to be, the opportunity to be self-introspective about how they want to participate in that, and whether that's self-participation or from a leadership role like I sit in. It all is as important as every other piece that makes up what the word leadership comprises of.
And I'm heading to a direction, which is we're going to sort of blend our conversation into the sort of bright minds conversation piece at the end, which we've kept as a surprise from each other and those around us to make sure that we have a really hearty conversation with the audience. The same question to you. You're traveling in your new role, you're meeting a lot of boards, you're meeting a lot of law firms, a lot of sort of government officials. What's the one thing you would love to be able to do, and maybe you do it, but what would you like to whisper in their ears, the CEOs leading some of the most influential law firms or restructuring firms globally right now, to start doing and to stop doing tomorrow? What would be your magic wand for us in the room? Because we don't get to go to those meetings or sit in some of those boardrooms. So what would you whisper in their ear today for the future?
Be fascinated and imaginative, and be available to embrace the wonderment of what this world has to offer. Get out of the space that you live in day to day, and when you have the opportunity to experience what the rest of the world has to offer, embrace it, enjoy it, learn from it. And really, for me, I have every day a childlike fascination with everything that I have the privilege to be touched by, and from the people I interface with and the cultures that I'm privileged to be invited into. And so I think that having that same magical wonder is something that will then reign so well on how you approach the world and think and open your own mind. Because it's very easy for us to be siloed into who we are and what we know. And while it may be hard to break out of that, if sometimes you just embrace it with absolute simplicity and charm and allow it to kind of soak into who you are as part of the experience that you're in, you can get so much out of it that then you can bring into your own value system and bring to your own leadership style.
Thank you, Scott. And we wanted to weave that into sort of our next sort of conversation around bright minds. But if I pause for a moment, we've Avex kindly typed a message. Are there any questions, thoughts, reflections from our members before we sort of move into sort of a segue into the next piece? Is there any thoughts, any reflections?
I do, Anton, if I may.
Carry on, Maria.
Yeah. the conversation is great. So many wisdoms and nuggets there. So thank you so much, Scott and Anton, and thank you for such a great questions. You talked earlier about fear, and of course, fear is something that it has both positive and negative connotations, mostly because we need fear to keep us safe. But for a leader, for people that have tremendous responsibility, what does that fear looks like? Like because you had to lead an organization that was 10,000 members, and now you're going to INSOL with, I don't know, 15,000 members. So it's a lot of responsibilities to deliver value to those members. So what was that fear for you look like?
Fear is making sure that I do not get overwhelmed by what's around me. And when I do start to feel overwhelmed or pressured by the things that are in front of me, that I take a step back and I allow myself to digest, and I allow myself to give thought to what the barrier that is being created or that I've created for myself, and how to best manage through that. That's easier said than done, because fear is an incredibly powerful human emotion that can be incredibly debilitating and can take over the person and the mind. And it's, I'm approaching it from a perspective of a lot of learning. Now, I'm not impervious to it, but very core to who I am, I try to find the contrary way to attack it. So similar to the way that I say, I need to make myself uncomfortable to be effective, by listening to thought that's not my own, by making sure I'm spending more time with another generation, by learning from cultures that are unfamiliar to me. It's the same concept for fear. You need to take fear and you need to stop when you feel it affecting your path forward, your judgment, and find the place of understanding of what's causing it, and then taking the elements of what comprises of it and slowly peeling them back to digest it and understand it and then work through it. The easy result is to succumb to it, and many people do. And then and you can see in the political landscape that is the world right now, particularly with populism is driven a lot by fear of something that's going to happen to you because of circumstances that you're being told exist. Fear is a powerful tool and a very easy vehicle to cause people to react. Overcoming fear is hard, but taking the moment to pause and digest what's causing the fear at its root, and then thinking about how to step back from it, to work around it, and to get through it is hard. But hard means being okay with being uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable is not a natural human state.
So it's identifying that initial emotion, those little negative thoughts that can become an overwhelming issue for oneself. I ask because I know that some leaders get burnt out very quickly, and I think part of the burnout is because of fear, and they put tremendous pressure on themselves. And I mean, obviously, I'm not a psychologist, but I do notice the same pattern. When they start to lose the perspective and the confidence, and it takes over very quickly. So.
Well, also, let me stop you there. Also, and look, it's not just about digesting it and working through it yourself. In your life, try to surround yourself with people, not who are yes people, but who are allies, who will have a conversation with you, and that you can, I'll use Anton as the example. Anton and I often talk about things that make us respectfully uncomfortable, and that we give each other a thought exchange that I think in both of our lives, in our professional lives, have led us to better places, because we trust each other and we trust the way we think. If you surround yourself in your work and personal life with people you can have that kind of exchange with, you're going to get an objective perspective that often you can't see yourself. And so it's important also to have people in your world that you can have a frank conversation with, and that will give you feedback, and maybe feedback you don't want to hear, but feedback that you'll trust because it's coming from the people who you do respect and trust for how they think and how they see the world.
Thank you.
So on that note, I'm going to challenge us in the room, and we can splice questions into this. And just for the audience to be clear, Scott doesn't know this, neither does anyone else. This is part of the Bright Minds, and I think this is driven by a brilliant article that's coming out soon that Tony kindly shared with me this morning, Tony Groom. I can't see if he's in the room, and it refers to the achievement of Tony and K2 to do a restructuring plan for a small business or a micro or small to medium business. So here's our challenge I'd like us to discuss and debate, and with Scott in the room and those from the States, it would be brilliant. My position is this, to set the debate going for us as EACTP members. Through the lens of the UK, insolvency practitioners, administrators, or trustees in the States, or judicial administrators, we might argue are creatures of statute. Hear me out. Turnaround managers, we may argue, are contracted or engaged. So in the UK, you've got your IPs regulated by, as officers of the court. In the Netherlands, the WOA recognizes judicially certain restructuring experts. And we can go through each jurisdiction, and there's that point. So here's my challenge to us, and I think this is the key theme I'd like us to discuss is, what are our responsibilities in the EACTP of fit and proper criteria, the ability to influence our duties that we might have to look to in order for us to, maybe it's an impossible answer, to become recognized to be things like monitors and moratoriums, and to perhaps shift the dial slightly, like the restructuring plan Tony's done, or how to shift the dial for EACTP members. I'm not suggesting to be regulated in the same way, but we always often throw stones. I'm saying we do that, but what's our responsibilities for the next 5 years as members? And it's an open question for us to debate, and I know it's a fresh one. I can't see who's in the room, but do we have any responsibilities as an organization to evolve ourselves?
I'm happy to throw a thought out there initially. I think in the restructuring world, one of the biggest things that is lost is that we have moved from an environment that used to be more purely technocratic, and you were taking the pieces of a situation and reconfiguring them in a way where the environment, the restructuring was the main body of what you were looking at, without looking at the things that have become important both to the next generation of professionals and for people at large. And that is the cultural aspect and the people aspect, and how the synergies between a successful business and the culture that runs that business have to be considered, and also the emotional toll taken on leaders, and how the culture needs to be in partnership with the leadership and an understanding of what the environment is to help fix the problem, and not just taking the problem, undoing the company, taking out the pieces and redoing it and calling that a success, because long-term it's not. And if you go back over time and you see some of the greatest mergers that have come out of the most complex restructurings, the ones that are the success stories are the ones that have the cultural foundation of success, and the ones that have failed are the ones that don't. And now with the next generation of professionals more in tune with that, I think that is a critical element that has long been missing from this environment. And so organizations like this, I think it would be beholden to them to take that as a key part of the scheme going forward.
Thank you, Scott. Quick question, technically, Maria, can everyone unmute and talk, or do they have to?
Yes, I think so. I think
Tony,
I'm unmuted.
Tony, do you want to share your question?
So there are aspects of turnaround that involve a number of factors. One of them is taking responsibility. One of them is communicating a message. One of them is making sure that everyone is aligned. And I'm just trying to ask myself, where is listening in all of that? Because ultimately, we all need to go in the same direction. And if we're going to have a shared purpose, if we all listen, how is that communicated? I understand, by the way, the Japanese approach to turnaround, and that is leaders don't say anything. It just happens because people share and talk about it. But it does evolve, whereas in a more crisis situation, you know, and I hate to use this sort of slightly militaristic metaphor, especially given my background, but in a crisis, often, you know, the triage tent needs to be manned by people who make decisions, execute decisions, communicate those decisions, and to take responsibility for them.
It's interesting question, Anton, as well, because just taking from Anton from Tony's comment, we also in a crisis situation is also at to what point an insolvency practitioner is involved in that crisis situation, and sometimes having to break the ice as a turnaround person to work with an insolvency practitioner when it's just on the borderline of an administration or an insolvency process is for me is crucial. It's just having the accountability to break the ice and say, well, these are the cards on the table, but it's formulating that strategy before you go there, because I'm pleased when I'm glad that Tyrone is in this call, because he is also an insolvency practitioner, so he can actually tell us his experience from the other side. But communication sometimes is not that straightforward when it comes in a crisis scenario.
Tony, I'm sorry, Tony, I wanted to respond to two parts of what you said, because they are more compatible than I think how you were sharing them. And I 100% agree with you that in an absolute crisis situation, triaging and making decisions in the moment is absolutely critical. And I don't want you to think I'm just this touchy-feely softy. I'm a very definitive and assertive leader. And I understand that when decisions have to be made, you have to have the fortitude and courage to make them, even if there might be collateral damage that happens as a result of some of those decisions. Once a situation is stabilized, however, and you have the latitude and ability to listen and the time to do that, then you should take advantage of it, because that becomes the element of the long-term strategy of how to fix it. But I'm not in disagreement with you at all, and I think you're absolutely right. In an emergency, in a crisis where you have to triage and where decision makers are charged with making decisions that have to be made in order to create stability and to assure survivability, yeah, that's an absolute critical element. Listening may have to be deferred and come in later because of the immediacy of the situation, but it can't be discounted, because I do think it has to be part of it for an overall success down the road.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I suppose where I'm coming from, you know, I cite this often, but I'm not sure many of you would have heard it. Everyone's heard of Harley-Davidson Motorcycle Group. They initiated a culture change program that they formally abandoned after 14 years when they decided it didn't work. And I advanced the notion of the 24-hour culture change. At the end of the day, for any organization to change, something, you know, behavior has to change. And one of the interesting things I think is this sort of notion of ownership of change, and all of the sort of psychology of behavior is sort of comes to the crucible of a turnaround. Now, we do benefit from the burning platform, and I'll just cover the insolvency piece in a second. But I believe we all want to work. Employees, the people we lead in change turnaround, want to work for a successful organization, and they often don't know what to do. So listening to them and inviting them, and you know, and my style is to frankly get everyone to a meeting, invite everyone to recognize that today we're talking about change, so that tomorrow everyone comes to work and does something different, because we know what doesn't work, what we did yesterday. And so it's that ownership of change, and I think it can be communicated. I think things can be done quickly. I also think that a lot of the role we have is legitimizing, giving permission to do things differently. You talked about failure, absolutely inviting people to make mistakes. Let me just briefly come on to the insolvency practitioner piece, Marie, you raised, and Tyrone's allowed to kick me under the table very hard. But the fact of the matter is this: an insolvency practitioner is appointed under a mandate.
Yeah.
You know, they're not, dare I say, they do have a leadership role, but they have a legal responsibility on day one. And that's why you read about them making redundancies by text message or what have you, because unfortunately, you know, leadership is quite a difficult and very different matter, because leading turnaround is completely different to administering an insolvency. Tyrone?
Yeah, no, I agree with much of what you say, Tony. I think
He's going to text you the answer there.
yeah, I mean, you can really split my work into two key categories, really. One is the twilight of insolvency, where much of what I would be doing would be leading and helping managements determine, you know, how they're going to deal with their problems. It's depressing to say that in a lot of the situations they are insurmountable, and that largely goes back to the psychology of, you know, owner managed businesses, which is mostly what I deal with, putting up their hand and asking for help, and only being prepared to do that when often it's too late. That's probably driven by the fear of the process, and that, unfortunately, for many in their community, has been a poor one, because they hear horror stories of, you know, well, we spoke to the insolvency practitioner, the next thing we know, the business was in liquidation, we were closed, and everybody had been laid off. And of course, the problem with that is it all becomes somewhat self-perpetuating, because they then become fearful of actually asking for help. And of course, you know, as we all know, if we can get in earlier, when we've got a bit more time, there's some more assets to be able to enable us to afford to affect the turnaround. As regards the second part, actually doing the formal insolvency process, I mean, it is somewhat more formulaic, because you're working towards a statutory regime. So certainly on liquidation, once the decision has been made to place the company into liquidation, then the leadership skills, I would suggest, tend to be much less of a requirement. I think it's different if you're trying to lead a continuing trading entity beyond just simply doing a sale of a business and assets by some form of pre-pack arrangement. So I think there's significant leadership skill required of the insolvency practitioner when you're looking to preserve as best you can the business's enterprise value, or more particularly an enhancement of its asset value, by continuing to trade to complete projects to the betterment of the, you know, the wider stakeholder group, principally the creditors and potentially the employees, while you're trying to find a buyer, while you're trying to do what's best for the business in really quite challenging and trying circumstances. Often employees are relieved when the administrator exits to some of the former management, because many of the employees would recognise that that's where the problem sits. So generally speaking, you can rally the troops and achieve, you know, the ultimate objective of trying to preserve the asset value as a going concern, and ultimately affecting a disposal of the business and assets as a going concern. I guess similarly, you could say in relation to company voluntary arrangements, although as supervisor, you're much less hands-on in terms of managing the business compared to an administration, but you still need a strength of conviction in your leadership to be able to convince the management that, not so much about it being the right thing to do, although often, I mean, that is the right thing to do, management trying to do best by their creditors, but also instilling within them the confidence that this process can work. And I guess that comes back from having the confidence as a practitioner and the experience to be able to, join all of the dots. There are many moving parts, but coercing all of those things together to say, this is what the Holy Land looks like when we get to the other side. Won't it be much better? So sort of follow me, and I'll take you on that journey.
So if I can pose my question in a slightly more sort of Southern Hemisphere landscape to the back of that, Tyron, is as EACTP or CTPs, what does the future hold for us if we wanted to be recognised formally? That's my burning question. And what I mean by that formally, Tony referred to sort of insolvency practitioners in the UK sort of coming in under the sort of court's mandate. Is that something to debate another time? Is that something too out there to have that conversation now? We're lucky to have Scott in the room because he might have a lens from sort of INSOL. You've got yourself, we've got CTPs. I'm just thinking of the next 5 years.
I think one of the biggest single challenges, certainly with the clients that I work with, I mean, that there is a degree of, particularly where it doesn't involve a formal insolvency process, when, incumbent within that process is the need to make the insolvency process public. But if you're working in turnaround, the last thing businesses often, or certainly in the owner managed space, want is for them to be, letting the public have sight of their dirty linen basket. And so it becomes quite a challenge, I think, to promote the good work that we all do in terms of trying to turn businesses around, because what you don't want is for there to be a run on confidence in the business that might follow if people were aware of your involvement.
Tony's gasping for air. 1 minute, Maria. Sorry, Tony.
So I think the message that the CTP should be pursuing is, and the missing piece is, if there's going to be a rescue of the business, if there's going to be a saving of the business, then we're trying to avoid essentially the assets being sold. And we needed some breathing space. So I would argue CTP should be pursuing some form of legitimacy to allow CTPs to administer a company, implement change with sufficient protection for the company, and possibly not protection for them, because that way they're on the hook. We should be accountable for our decisions. And in saying that, I believe we should somehow be seeking to be allowed to implement a moratorium, so the creditors cannot take legal action against the company, albeit with some degree of oversight or what have you, while we initiate a CVA or a restructuring plan or a consensual restructuring. And that will need some sort of training wheels to make sure that we don't abuse it. I believe it should be a qualification like a CTP to allow it to happen. Lawyers are advising insolvency practitioners not to take on moratoriums because they're suggesting that insolvency practitioners can be held liable. I personally think leadership is all about taking responsibility for our actions, and therefore we should feel comfortable taking responsibility for our actions in turning around a company, but we need protection from the court.
And thank you, Tony. I really value your directness there, and I think that was the direction of my travel, which was how could we as the EACTP, personally, I agree with you, get to a point where we need to take some responsibility to get to a point of even being a monitor in a moratorium. I agree, and that's why I was hoping those questions would get us there. Any other views? I appreciate that's a UK-centric view. We do have sort of the WOA, which has 40 hours of training for CTPs to become, to be recognised by courts. We've got the same in Italy. I think it's 60 hours from memory, and maybe that's one of the things we should be looking at. That killed that one off then.
I know.
No, Maria, it's killed. It's dead.
No, I just think Dr. Weiss is here in the call. I saw him and he's obviously he understands the pains that they suffer in Germany, particularly when you're trying to do turnaround, because there is the personal liability, or at least he was in the call, but I don't see his name anymore. But it's interesting because for a CTP, obviously we take as a CTP myself, we take accountability and responsibility for the actions that we take on a closed doors sort of negotiations, and then you try to deliver the turnaround within the consensual agreements that you have with your creditors. But obviously legislation will help if also in terms, like if we were to talk here about in the UK, the restructuring plans, making it more accessible, and also for lawyers to support the work that we do and convince the insolvency practitioners, who are ultimately at the moment the supervisors on the moratorium, that we can actually support the process. And that is, I don't know how we can actually achieve it unless it's for lobbying, but also insolvency practitioners have their agenda, and it's all parties are pulling their way rather than pulling onto the main stakeholders' way. And that is that's the only barrier I see for us to actually see be more established or be more recognized. Sorry, Anton, that was
not at all. We've got 5 minutes. Avik has put his hand up, and I'd like to leave the last word with Scott to reflect on his on leadership and the direction of travel of his own cross-border leadership. So, Avik.
Yeah, I will just complete in a short while. My portion is like what Maria Madam told, that is important, that post intervention might be required. But apart from the same, there is a difference. See, when you are talking about corporate restructuring or turning around a company, it's somewhat different than the scope of work involves into a insolvency professional or bankruptcy professionals. So it comes earlier stage. So if you have enough networking with the banks or financial institutions, because while going into insolvencies, you will have less opportunity to revive value. While if you can adapt, if there is a procedure at the time when restructuring is important, or there is certain intervention is important, that not only for the financial institutions, it might be for asset reconstruction companies. I'm from India, so little bit I'm aware of asset reconstruction companies and its scope of works that perform. Apart from the same, there are multiple PE funds nowadays are very much active. If you see 5-7 years back, they were not that active. At present, they are active. These guys must have invested in a couple of companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, where probably in everywhere they don't get, adequate turnover or adequate value increase. So those things can be plotted where, the importance of restructuring professional or turnaround professionals will be actually needed. And talking about how it can be increased, I believe in today's scenario, apart from whatever we are studying, we are trying to gather knowledge. I believe a little bit of more importance may be given to the data analytics and all, because that is also creating some amount of importance in management consulting. So this is the part of management consulting, like finding the trouble that the business is having and finding its adequate solution. So that's all. Sorry.
Thank you, Avik, for your reflections. Scott, leading across borders, the final word is yours. Take it where you'd like to, with your role in INSOL, or a leaving message for us as leaders in the room today and tomorrow.
I'm going to thank you, Anton, and I appreciate the interview and the exchange you and I have had, and this forum to do this. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Maria, as well. But I'm going to harken back to something Tony Tony, you sparked in my mind. Leadership, when you are coming from a restructuring lens, is a whole different world than leadership in the more general sense. And I think it becomes a lot more complex and has a lot more elements that you have to manage, particularly when you're dealing in a crisis situation or a situation where the decisions you make may be life and death for a company and its employees, and potentially for a wider economy. So I think I leave you with this. I think restructuring professionals, if they approach leadership with an understanding that it's a balance of both having to make crisis-oriented decisions, yet taking the traditional roles that a leader must otherwise play and trying to put them in balance as best they can, you will emerge and remain both an effective professional in the restructuring realm, and you will create a path forward that will make you a powerful and impactful leader. And I think just from hearing your reflections, Tony, that's kind of how I want to leave this, because I think we are a unique universe of people who have to, by necessity of what we do, approach leadership through a much different lens than many other leaders do.
Thank you, Scott. Maria, Helen, do you want to leave us with, I'm not sure if there's another slide about next events or up and coming, or simply that's a wrap. I'm not sure where you want to go with this.
Yeah, no, we have our next mastermind is in December, and I don't know if Helen can actually put the timetable that it is on the 11th of September of December. So I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for coming today, for your contributions. Anton, Scott, you were terrific. And of course, I can't thank you enough for bringing back the same chemistry that you had in Bergamo to this webinar, who will be enjoyed for many to watch in YouTube later on. But thank you all. And thank you for those who contributed to the conversations, and the students as well who attended. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Thank you.